The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, whoever's in the broadcast now, can you just write me a quick note in chat and make sure you can hear me and everything's lined up there, you can see all right. If I can't, I would assume no one can hear me otherwise. Everyone can hear me? Anyone? If those of you who are just popping in now, can you quickly write down in chat and put up your hand in the question poll if you can hear me all right. Just want to make sure that everyone can hear and see what I'm doing. Okay, David's got his hand up. Let's start. All right, well, okay. Both Davids got two hands up. I'm going to assume that means that everyone can hear me all right. I'm going to give it probably just another minute to get some more people in. We've got a lot more attendees signed up for this. Just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to pop in before I take off on it. And everyone can see all right up there? You see the slide? Okay, again, in about a minute, I'm going to get started on this, and we'll get it together. There's still some more people floating in, so I'm going to give them a little minute to set up. Oh, I just looked at my question pane. You guys are all writing in the question pane. That's good. I can see it in there. That works too. That's good practice later on in the question period. We'll be using that a lot. Thanks everyone for that. Okay. So I think we're going to give it maybe one more minute. Don't see chat. That's interesting. I thought it was available on the clients. I guess it's not available on the webinar clients, and that's fine. Question works too. I'm looking at the right place. Does it work? All right. We're going to get started on this, and anyone who filters in can catch up. We'll be recording it for later, so that's fine. So this is another edition of our MetaLogix 30-minute quick takes. I guess it's a special Earth Day edition of Archive Manager Quick Take. My name's Adam Silver. I've worked with Archive Manager for a long time, and we're going to be talking about PST Import today, which is a interesting subject. It can be very confusing. We get lots of people kind of tied up in PST Importer in terms of how it works and the exact function of what they're doing when they're importing a file. So I think this is a good one to do, and we're going to use the standard format for our 30-minute quick takes, which is 15 minutes. I'm going to try to get through all the information and the data, and if you've got any questions during the 15 minutes, just go ahead and put them into the question pane, and at the end of that 15 minutes, I'll open it up for questioning, for QA, and I'll go through any questions we've got or any new questions we've got after that, and try to answer anything you've got. As long as you keep it within the frame of the quick take. So we're going to be answering PST import specific questions today. Now, outside of that, we'll have to either switch to another quick take at some point, or you can go straight to support as usual and ask us questions. So let me just get started. We're going to do this step by step. So our goal today is a quick overview of the PST Importer tool in Archive Manager Exchange Edition. The first thing we're going to look at is we've got a new Archive Manager installation. We're getting set to use it. We open up PST Import for the first time. There's a couple of things that need to be set up, options, and it will sternly warn you if you don't have those defaults and options set up. So we're going to go take a look at those. I'm just going to switch over to my test server here. All right, hopefully everyone can see that all right. So in our test server, we've got an Archive Manager test server, and this is running our latest and greatest version 7, but the PST Importer in version 7, unlike a lot of other things, remains exactly the same and has the same functionality. So we're going to open it up and take a look. And we got PST Importer. So PST Importer is open. Defaults and options we want to look at in Tools, Options. We'll worry about these other tabs after we'll be taking a look at, but right now when we're first going into it, we're first going to start importing PSTs. Specifically, we want to be on the default tab. We want to look at what this is about. Now, when I bring a PST in, and in fact, I'll do that right here, bring in a test PST so you can see what it looks like. So I'm adding a PST. I'm going to bring in this guy right here. And you'll notice that it's looking for a destination folder and it has a default user. So unless you set that default user, it can't import. It needs somewhere to know that if I don't have a user assigned to this, where do I send it? So back to Options, Default. I've got my test user 1 in there as my default user, but you can use any archive user in the system. And in this case, what that means is that if I have a PST import and I push the PST into the system and I just press go, and it's set to default, it's automatically going to go to test user 1's archive mailbox. And so it's the bottom line default if nothing else is assigned above it. Okay. If no destination is selected for a user, this user will be used, folder will be used as default, sorry. What's this about? Well, if this is blank, then what it's going to do is attempt to inject the items in the PST into the appropriate folder it's in the PST. What that means is if you have an email tree in the PST, let's say your PST file has inbox and all the subfolders below that. Assuming this is blank, what the system is going to do is it's going to try to inject all the items that are in the inbox in the PST into the inbox in the mailbox. And so you're going to see everything trying to go into the same folder that it came out of. And it will create the folders that it can't find as well, but it will create them in the main body of that mailbox as if they were already there in the first place. Right? Now, let's say we go in here and we type in PST in here. You'll notice it grays out the one underneath. We'll talk about that in a second. What that means is we've given it a destination folder. Now, instead of taking all the items that are in the inbox in the PST and putting them into the inbox in the mailbox, it's going to create a folder called PST in the mailbox it's injecting into, and it's going to put the entire tree in the PST, the subfolder tree, in that PST folder. So you'll have a PST folder and it'll have its own inbox. So you're essentially targeting one folder and keeping it separate from the rest of the mailbox that you're inserting this into. Now, the folder underneath, let's see, we say we have this blank. So right now we've got it setting stuff directly into, right now we've got it set directly into the folders as naturally as they are in the PST. So the inbox and the PST goes in the inbox and the mailbox. What this is, and this is important, is that often when people make PSTs, I'm sure you guys know this, they won't build subfolders in the PST. They'll just have a PST and they'll just dump everything into it. You know, stuff they don't want but they want to keep. They're just going to have a huge file, and it's all going to be in the root folder of the PST. Outlook doesn't like that. Archive Manager doesn't like that. Exchange doesn't like that. It really has problems with having anything in the root folder. It can't work that way. So what this is, and this is, by the way, absolutely essential. If you try to leave both blank and hit OK, it's going to tell you can't do it. What this is saying is that anything that's in the root of the folder and you can't find a folder for it, it's going to put it in this PST folder. And what that means is if you have a bunch of items that are in the root of the folder and then a folder that says inbox in the PST and a bunch of items in there, and you run this PST with these settings, it's going to take all the things that are in the inbox, put them in the inbox of the mailbox. But anything that's in the root of the PST is going to go into another folder it's going to create called PST in that mailbox. So I hope that's a little bit confusing, but we can talk about it in questions after as well, and we can demonstrate it as well, I think, in here. So always create the whole folder tree. That's whether you're going to want to create the tree or just put a bucket. If it's clicked on, and it usually is it's going to put the folders in place in the PST. If it's clicked off, then it's just going to dump them all in one big pile, usually in that PST folder. Okay. This one's important, the move not archivable messages to mailbox. This is one of our really common issues. So any mail type in the archive system that by default isn't archivable or is set not to archive. For instance, a lot of you have come across this, contacts, calendar items, stuff that can be rendered read-only by the archive system. It ignores them. And what happens is if you have a calendar item or a contact in a PST, you end up in a situation where the system will ignore it, but assuming this is checked, it takes that item. Let's say you have a calendar item in your PST. It'll take it and inject it directly into the mailbox. It'll pass it through into Exchange without creating an archived copy of it. Now, if you unclick this, it's going to actually just ignore it. It will leave it in the PST, leave it alone, and it won't move it into Exchange. So you have a situation where you've got an email, and it'll just keep, or a PST, and it'll just keep all the contacts. Anything that can't archive in the PST won't pass it through. Okay, so if you're ever importing a PST, a huge PST, and you see a number of contact items suddenly magically appearing in your mailbox. And by the way, they usually come in with read receipts because people haven't read them. We see that a lot. And suddenly the user on the other end suddenly starts to get all these notifications of missed appointments. That's the culprit right there. It's that they're moving old appointments from a PST directly into Exchange. Okay. Clear existing list before new searching. Don't worry about that guy. That has to do with PS gathering, which is a totally different scope topic we'll probably work on later or maybe in another quick take. So these are the main items in the default system. And we'll show you a little bit of that in action a little bit later on. So right now we want to move to our next topic, which is going to be all right, analyzing PST files. So analyzing PST files is an optional item, and it works a little like this. Let's say this demo import PST I brought in. There is, again, in options, a folder that says analyze, and this allows automatic analyzing. So when you activate this, it means it analyzes automatically every PST you bring in, but I think it's a good demonstration of how this actually works. So analyzing the PST is to find out what folder it belongs to. You're asking it to automatically figure out what mailbox this should go into. And the way it works is it can look at two fields. It looks at either the from or the to field. And essentially it says, I'm looking at this PST. If more than 10%, in this case, of items in that PST are the same person in the from count, so let's say my name, let's say more than 10% of items in the PST said Adam Silver in the from field, it'll automatically assume that that is the destination folder it's going into. That's the mailbox it's going to go to. That's the user it belongs to. Same for the to. If you want to do it that way, it'll switch to the to, and it'll say, you know, what percentage of the same item is in the to field for this item, for this mailbox, and if so, I'll assume the ownership of that mailbox or that PST. You also have the option to always ask, so every time you bring it in, it'll automatically kick in and say, okay, who does this belong to? This is what we see of the percentages. And of course, you can adjust the percentage to whatever you want. If you want it to be absolutely sure, you can have 80%. If it doesn't, if you don't have anything that reaches up to that percentage, it's going to ask automatically if it's confused, okay? And that's for automatic analyzing. At any point when you've got a mailbox like this, you actually can force it to analyze just by right-clicking, hitting Analyze, select it. And it'll come in, and in this case, this PST has literally like one email copied 50 times, and it's from Mark Hartley to test user 2. So you'll see here, it's pulled up the stats for that and the ratio, and you can decide who it belongs to. In this case, I'll just say it belongs to Mark. Assign it over there, or I can decide it belongs to test user 2, and when I close it, it's going to automatically default to that user. So you can set it to automatically do it, or you can manually kick it off, but all it's doing is looking at the to and from fields, seeing what percentage belongs to who. I'll bring up a slightly more complex one for that too. these lovely PST files I've built up. Analyze this one. This one's got a lot more stuff in it. So it does not contain a synchronized user. What that means is that no user in this import, and I've built these PST files off of the archive system, no user in this system is in the archive system. So not a single from or to in this particular PST actually belongs to anyone. So by default, it's going to go directly into the default mailbox, which in this case is set in defaults in test user 2, right over here. So none of these items have anything to do with any archived user who has an archived mailbox. Therefore, it won't bring it in. Just bring in another one so we can play with it. See if this one's got some. I pulled this out of the current archive system. Okay, so here's a more complicated one. You can see the percentages are quite different. None of these would actually hit 10%, so it would always ask. Oh, no, these two do. Actually, a bunch of them do. So, I mean, if you had it automatically analyzing, it would, let's say you had it automatically analyzing the 2, it would automatically kick into the support user. But in this case, we can decide who it is. I'm going to leave it in default in this case. So that's analyzing. It's just trying to figure out what user mailbox this PST belongs to automatically. Okay. So I believe that's pretty much it for analyzing. We can field some more questions on that later. Now the process of importing PST files, and this is one that we really want to go through very carefully because it trips people up. Okay. So I'm going to remove these and just start with one so we can get a better idea without getting too complicated. Now, the important piece of this in options is this first tab, folders. And we're going to kind of watch it in action. So the first one, the import folder, holds the PST files prepared for import. Now, what this means, and it's important to realize that when we brought demo import.pst into the importer, it didn't touch the original PST file. It made a copy of it. And you'll see right here, and I'll just do the whole kind of path here. In MetaLogix, MAM Exchange, PST, import. It's made a copy of that item and it's dropped it in this folder. And it's going to work with this copy, so the original is left untouched, right? As long as it's sitting in this import tab, it's going to be in the import folder. The same goes for the processed tab. The processed tab is, let's say in a situation like we talked about earlier where there's a bunch of calendar items in there, well, we've told the system not to move them to the archive box. In fact, let's do that right now. I think there might be some calendar items in here. And import test. And I'm going to go in here. I'm going to tell it not to move archivable messages to mailbox. In fact, let's leave it on and do a test both ways. So in this case, I'm going to import it and let it go. It's going to do its thing. Import the items. And when it's done, it's going to actually move it. So it removed it from import. And you'll see that it removed it from here as well. So it's removed it from both the import folder and that. So you've got your original, and it's deleted the copy after it's moved everything into place. Now, if we go to Tools, Options, Default, shut that off, and we tell it not to move that stuff from place to place, or into Exchange if it can't archive it. We did the same email, PST. And that's assuming this one has calendar items, and I believe it does. Now we import it. Right, so some messages were not imported, were not moved to the mailbox. It's got some calendar items, I couldn't archive them, and it's telling me not to push into Exchange. So for details, see the log file, PST files are not empty. So what it's done is it's taken that file and it's moved it into processed. And process means, okay, I've processed this whole PST, I've moved everything I can archive into the archive, but there's some stuff left over that I can't move into Exchange either because we set it to do that. And as you'd expect, that would actually pop up here in the processed folder as well. So it's moved the remaining PST in here. And yes, this PST has had everything removed that's archived, so all that's going to be left inside of it is those calendar items. So you can find out what hasn't been brought into the archive if it's moved into the process folder, and you just open up the PST, you'll see it, right? So Error is one we're not going to be able to demonstrate because I don't have a PST that's faulty or corrupt, but a lot of you have seen this. If it has an error or something it can't actually, or the PST is corrupt, it can't do it for some reason, it can't archive at all, it's going to move it directly from the import all the way into the error folder. And again, that would be over here as well, the error folder. So bad processed in this case is where it's called. Bad processed. And that's corresponding to that error folder. Okay. People have often asked, can I go back and try to re-archive it? So let's say, can I go back into the archive system, allow it to archive calendar items, and then re-import it just the way it is? Yes, but the key here is it's going to stay in that process folder as long as you don't get rid of it. As soon as you hit remove, it's going to delete it entirely because it's done working with it, and you're going to have to start from the original again. What you can do is, instead of removing it from the process folder here, just move it back to import. So now it's moved the altered piece back into import. This piece only has the remaining stuff that wasn't archived, and you can run it again. You know, in this case, it's going to go directly back into process because I still have it told not to. Do calendar items. Okay, so that's sort of the process of how the file moves from folder to folder and how the copy we make of the PST is processed as it runs through, and that's something that people see a lot. Okay, let's check really quick. I'm going to open up Enterprise Manager and look at some of the stuff we've done and talk about some of the defaults that we set up. So we'll look at the PST folder. Test user one's our default user, and I've done these imports a couple of times now. And you'll see that anything that wasn't done, anything that was imported that was in the actual inbox of the inbox folder in the PST has been moved directly into the inbox of the user, test user one. All that stuff moved directly in there. Anything that was in the root of the PST file, so if it just was in the items that were actually put in the root of the PST file with no subfolder structure were put directly into the PST folder. Now, it's important to realize that even if you import a piece that does have subfolder structure and doesn't have everything in the root, it's going to create, I think I can see this over here, it's going to create a PST folder anyway because it needs an open basket for you to be able to put stuff in the root in, because otherwise it can corrupt the mailbox and it'll show up blank. So you can go and delete that folder afterwards if there's nothing inside of it, but it will create that folder before it starts importing, so that folder will exist. Let's move on a little bit, and we'll talk soon about the rest of this. Okay, process of importing PST files. That's what I was getting at. I wanted to go through the processed, bad processed, and the import process. So let's talk about log files. Conscious of the time, we'll move on to that. Now, in the PST importer, we've got a log file we can set. Right here, view log file. Oops. Yeah, so viewing log files. You'll have a list of all the log files that have been done in the system. And scheduler stuff, this has to do with the gatherer. Again, we're not going to deal with that today, but we talk about that in a different quick take. Usually it's the one right at the top. It does run the log over and over. When you analyze, it's got a log for that. You're going to see a bunch of items in here. Just pull it open. And you can't clear it, it'll start again on the new one. But these are all the analyzes I've done the last little while. So recipients, it's going to say what it looked for, like what the percentage, the ratio. Basically the report it gives us and analyzes is just going to be logged in here. Top recipients, and that's the number of messages in and out senders received. So the main one, of course, we look at a lot is the PST log. And if we look at that, we're going to see all the imports we just did as well. Let me just open that up. We'll move right to the bottom. These are the last couple we did. You'll see here that the system has gone in. There's no deleted items, nothing in deleted items, but imported 9 messages. There were 0 messages in the root of the PST that it had to move into the PST. There were total number of 9 messages. Total number of messages is 9. There's a couple of reasons why it does that. Different item types can end up in different totals. Archive messages, 0. The reason that is I had already run that, so they're already in place. Messages to move, 9. So this is actually the calendar input we brought. Messages to move is the number of calendar items that are or non-archivable IPM types. And because it couldn't move them, it said not move messages, as opposed to earlier on, we did right before that, it, go up far enough. It's a moved messages. That was before we unclicked the exchange move option. So these it moved directly into exchange. And you'll see here it had total 21 messages. 9 of those were calendar items. It moved 9 of those to exchange and archived the rest. Okay. Let's just go over these one by one. Moved messages are items that are moved into exchange directly without being archived all the way through. Not moved messages are items that could not be moved into exchange, usually because you've unclicked that option, and so it hasn't moved into exchange. It's left them in the PST. Errors are corrupt items, items it couldn't move, it tried to access, couldn't do it at all, and just left it. Skip messages. Now, skip messages are specific item types. There's kind of a special category for them. And I can't remember the specific IPM types, but stuff like recurring calendar items. Recurring calendar items can't at all be archived in any way. So they're skipped over entirely. The system just ignores them. So you'll see those items in there. Import, finish, and that's about it. You've got assigned user. And by the way, this assigned user, this refers to the internally assigned number for the user in Archive Manager. There, you'll always see that. You can figure out which archive mailbox it goes into that way. Okay, and if you've ever got questions about this, I believe in our knowledge base, there's an article that covers all of these one by one and shows you exactly what each one means. Okay, so the last thing we wanted to do, I'm just going to flip back to my PowerPoint and talk about troubleshooting. So I'm going to go over these one by one. If you want sort of a demonstration, it's kind of hard because I don't have any really failed bad PST files to work with. But PST file size and corruption, you guys have worked with PSTs a lot, most of you. And we know that PSTs can have big problems. As soon as they go over 2 gigs, up to 10 gigs, sometimes people bring us a 100 gig PST file and they say it's not importing. PST files by nature corrupt at larger sizes. Try not to let them get that big. And it's a big issue with us. We get a lot of corrupt PST files. And if they're corrupt, we just can't bring them in. So try to keep your PST files really small if you can. If you do have a really big one, it's corrupt, it's not working, there's all sorts of resources online that'll help you out with that. Scan PST, which is a tool that comes with Office, works very well to scan through a PST, and you can find information about that. Assuming you can get it fixed and non-corrupt, the system will bring it in. But oftentimes, you'll have corrupt items in a PST. If it's too big, the whole PST will be corrupt. It's not a perfect file format, so it's important to be aware of that. Retention categories and shortcut handling for PST imports is another big one. Let me flip back to the server real quick. Now, you'll actually have in here a archive tab, and the archive tab has your retention category. This is the retention category that the importer is using to archive all the items that you're pulling in the PST. Important piece here is that it will handle shortcuts the exact same way that your retention policy is told to do. So if your retention policy says create a shortcut right away, and it moves something into Exchange, it's going to make a shortcut right away. If your retention policy says don't create a shortcut, it's going to not create a shortcut, but it's going to move the entire copy over into Exchange, so you have an item that does not have a shortcut. If your retention policy says delete the original, it's not going to move it to Exchange at all. So you got to refer back to your retention category to see how it's handling the shortcuts as it moves PSTs through. Okay. Going. So supported item types, we covered that a little bit. Let me just go back one, double-clicked. Supported item types we covered a little bit. It handles different IPM types based on what the archive system is set to handle. And it will either skip them if they're recurring calendar type, move them if you've asked it to, or leave them in the PST otherwise. So you've seen how each of those interacts. Mailbox folder issues. It's important to pay attention to those default options we set as to where it's going to put the archives, because those will delineate where you're going to find the PST after you put it in place. And there's a couple of neat little tricks you can do. I'm just going to bring up this piece of the manual, which is a neat trick that a lot of people don't do that often. So in our manual here, you'll see you've got a PST archive. This is the administrator. By the way, this is our PST Importers Administrator Manual, which you can find on our website in the downloads. And you'll notice that in here you can actually use all sorts of wildcards. And these ones are quite handy if you've got several PSTs, a whole bunch of different PSTs in place, and you want them all to move to one mailbox, but you want them to stay individual and separate. You can use things like the PST name and file name wildcard down here in a slash, and what's going to do is it's going to create a different folder for each PST as it imports them into that mailbox using either the name or the file name. There's a few neat tricks we can use that way, and you can refer to the manual to find them. So mail folders can be manipulated, but it's important to pay attention to where your import's going to go. All right. So I'm going to flip back to my little server here, and I'm going to answer some questions. I know I've gone a bit over time, so if you've got questions for this next little section, drop them into the questions box, and I've already got one here that I'm going to go with. Okay. So, Jeffrey, does the PST importer need to be run from the archive server, or can it be run from a different server workstation? It absolutely has to be run from an archive server. Some people have multiple archive servers. Some people have, I've seen PST import specific servers where they just bring up an archive server just to do PST imports on it. But it does have to be run from a server infrastructure. Okay. I feel like I've done a lot of talking. If you guys want to do some now, go ahead and mark into the question box. Let me know if you've got questions. No questions out there? Yeah, I mean, David's asking, can it import large PSTs over a network share? There's no reason it can. You can bring in that PST from the network share. Remember, it makes a copy when it begins into the import folder. So it's actually doing it locally. So you can import a large PST over a network share, but you can't import a PST into a space where there isn't room for that space locally, if that makes sense. So yeah, you can do it. You just need to make sure that you have enough room on the local resource to actually process it. Anyone else? All right. Well then, I'm going to assume no one else has any questions, but as usual, if you do have more questions, just open up a case with us, let us know, support metalogics.com, and we're happy to answer any questions you've got. Hope everyone has a great day, and I hope you got a lot of valuable information out of this, and have a great afternoon.